Welcome back. Last time we finished our overview of the governments of the primary flawed communities in The Last of Us. The next several videos will focus on elements of these human ecologies that are less dominant but nonetheless important. In this segment, we'll look at women's roles in The Last of Us, focusing on their opportunities for participation and social standing as a demographic in Boston's military and underworld, Billstown, Pittsburgh, David's Camp, and the Fireflies. At this point, I would like to provide a trigger warning that this video refers to sexual violence when necessary to discuss women's roles in certain human ecologies. These segments refer to sexual violence without dwelling upon it in detail. So, with that said, there remains only one more prefatory statement. I would like to assert once more that I consider these ecologies that we've reviewed as fundamentally flawed because they each relate to the main characters through violence and aggression. This is in contrast to the peaceful dealings with Maria's camp, and in contrast to the fact that we do not encounter any survivors of the sewer camp, so any combat on the sewer camp grounds is not based on willful violence. The site is filled with infected, and that violence lacks any component of moral decision. As for the others that we're discussing, the caustic relationship between the player character and each society slants the player's perception against the society. Our understanding of them is informed by the fact that they try to kill us. This is an instance in which interactive structure combines with narrative content, so that the game can silently offer the player an ambiguous moral position on most of these human ecologies. There's more to them than their efforts to kill Joel and Ellie, but they're still trying to kill Joel and Ellie. The game's ambiguity is most powerful when it gives our enemy's aggression a potentially sympathetic narrative context. We'll observe some of that ambiguity now as we turn our attention toward the roles of women in the flawed human ecologies of The Last of Us. Our first look is at the Boston quarantine zones. Women have active roles as conscripts.
I got served the damn papers this morning. I've been selected for outside work duty.
And as military personnel.
Yeah. Way I heard it, they line them up in the street and cut them up. Retribution and shit. We ever lose control of this place to the stragglers, that's what'll happen to us.
We learn from Ellie that girls are allowed admission into the military schools.
I stayed at a place like this, back in the Boston QZ.
Military preparatory school.
Yeah, nice way of saying orphanage. I wonder what happened to all these kids.
Oh, this place has been out for a good stretch. They ain't kids no more.
Meaning they're either hunters trying to kill us, or they're dead.
We learn this information in Pittsburgh, well after we've left Boston. It's subtle, but revealing. If we assume that the various quarantine zones across America were assembled within a range of at least a few years of each other, and if we assume that the first graduating classes of the students are the hunters' ages, then we can know, by syllogism, that the women serving in Boston's military were enrolled in military school from childhood forward. This indicates an insistence on gender equivalence in the military. It's a value they continue to reinforce through their institutions.
This is Ramirez at Sector 12, requesting pickup for 3 stragglers.
Moving into the Boston slums, we see women take participatory roles as shopkeepers.
If you ain't got ration cards, don't even waste my time. I'm not interested in bartering for bullets.
And they also participate in stereotypically male spaces such as betting on fights. And, of course, women are capable of participating as underworld entrepreneurs, as we see in Tess.
Well, I have some interesting news for you.
Where were you, Tess?
West End District. Hey, we had a drop to make.
We had a drop to make.
Well, you wanted to be left alone, remember?
So I'll take one guess. The whole deal went south and the client made off with our pills. Is that about right?
Deal went off without a hitch. Enough ration cards to last us a couple of months, easy.
As with virtually every other thematic component in The Last of Us, the game goes austere and silent in Billstown after providing much variety in Boston. Simply put, there are no women, and the explanation for that is pretty simple. Women are human beings, and Bill doesn't like other human beings.
You picked a hell of a place to hole up, didn't you?
You know, as bad as those things are, at least they're predictable. Normal people get scared. You of all people should understand that.
What does that mean?
Nothing.
This most likely accounts for their absence in his town, though Bill's implied gay orientation and his relationship with Frank suggests that the absence of women reflects Bill's positive, active preference for men.
Once upon a time, I had somebody that I cared about. A partner. Somebody I had to look after.
Instead of a negative, passive, patriarchal ill will toward women in general. Bill does, in fact, appear to respect Tess.
How in the hell is Tess okay with this suicide mission?
It's actually her idea.
Really? Well, the broad's not as smart as I thought she was.
Indicating, I think, that the absence of women does not imply a hostile attitude toward them as a group. Pittsburgh is a very different story. We have three main references to women in the Pittsburgh scenario, and they trace a narrative of women's social erasure there. As before, we need to use the skills of observation and inference to understand women's place in Pittsburgh's history. Pittsburgh started out as a typical quarantine zone. We can therefore infer that women's roles resembled those seen in Boston. We can also know that Pittsburgh's military allowed women to enlist from documents located within the city. This correlates with the women in uniform we saw back in Boston. Women had active roles among the revolutionaries as well. The final attack note called for every able-bodied person to rise up in arms, without discrimination between genders. As well, if we take into account the mother whose letter documents her radicalization, women appear to have been able to hold power as civilians as well. However, after the revolution, as the revolutionaries became the hunters, women's social and military presence appears to have disappeared entirely, along with other ideals that the revolutionaries fought for, such as freedom from authoritarian abuse, which they inadvertently traded for an immoral pack mentality. Pittsburgh revises the transition from Boston's variety of potential roles for women to Billstown's complete lack of women. The city adopts a fraternal social structure, revising the entirely male space of Billstown.
You had an entire flock and you hit nothing. I'm about to hit you. Wow. Yeah, you're really upset. Well, if you want some lessons, I'm more than willing to help you out. Yeah, whatever.
However, Billstown's combination of isolation and an implied gay love relationship does not actively erase women. Pittsburgh implies that women are present, somewhere, but kept well out of sight. Consider this conversation among hunters that we've listened to before.
We were up all night chasing this tourist.
Oh yeah, you were a part of that? I heard about this.
Yeah, this one chick, she would just not give up. I've never seen anyone with so much fucking energy. It took a couple minutes to snuff everyone else, and fucking 5 hours to hunt her ass down.
Jesus. Sometimes you gotta earn your keep, right?
Yeah, I guess. We were about to give up when she started shooting at us. It's stupid. She could have got away. I had 2 other guys keep her busy. I took out my rifle, lined up her little head in the crosshairs, and pow! That was that.
Damn. Well, maybe you should have kept her. Made her one of us.
No way. That girl, she'd have killed us all in her sleep.
We can assume that these hunters hold a baseline value for women, however marginal, since they refuse to assimilate her not explicitly on the grounds that she was a woman, but because she was volatile, unpredictable, and violent. However, this underscores one of the ways in which the hunter's survival of the fittest mentality blends with traditional patriarchal social structure. The hunters speak about women as things to capture and to control, to be made into one of them. There is no direct reference to sexual violence here, but the fear of a wild woman, a woman whose energy would exhaust or even destroy a dominantly male space, points towards social assumptions about gender roles that underwrite sexual or gender-based violence. The well-documented fear of a wild woman disrupting fixed male dominance appears even in these hunters' word choices as they recount the event.
I've never seen anyone with so much fucking energy. It took a couple minutes to snuff everyone else, and fucking 5 hours to hunt her ass down.
We discussed this as foreshadowing for the best interactive strategies for Ellie before, and this event retains that significance. However, when viewed from the angle of women's power, it signifies another regression of the hunter's culture, especially when you consider the fact that women and men appeared able to share military or entrepreneurial roles in Boston. Pittsburgh's fraternal social structure is so firmly male that we only encounter women as a passing reference. In the Wild Woman standoff, we see echoes of Tess's final stand, but we don't see the final stand. The outcome that resulted when this wild woman fired back communicates both narrative content, and the fact that we only encounter stories of defeated women affirms by association that women have lost the right to bear arms and resist the martial side of this ecology. The hunter's suppression of women and their culture of violence are buds from the same stalk. Rape is an implied element in this human ecology. After Ellie saves Joel, we find a note written on the wall. Hunters have defaced and responded to the note, strongly implying a woman's capture and then sexual abuse. I think that this is a consequence of a fraternal social order's expression of patriarchal control over women, making the hunter's camp one of the darker human ecologies that we encounter in the game. In terms of structure, then, Pittsburgh remixes and revises both Boston and Billstown. It revises Boston by showing the disappearance of women's roles after a revolution,
We ever lose control of this place to the stragglers, that's what'll happen to us.
and it revises Billstown's initial image of fraternity that doesn't include, but that also does not erase women, into Pittsburgh's image of a fraternity that openly regards women as things to control and suppress.
Hey, Bobby Fischer, don't touch anything on that board.
Women in David's camp appear primarily as child-bearers and caretakers, both of which are traditional roles within patriarchal social organization. Because of their suppression into those fixed, limited roles, we see backlash against female power in David's aggression toward Ellie. Let's look at how all of that unfolds. David portrays the women of his camp in traditional terms of weakness. He brings up women in his conversation with Ellie to evoke pity, implying that women are weak or burdens that he and James must bear, as men and as masters of the community.
But from a larger group, women, children, we're all very, very hungry.
So am I. Women and children, all very hungry too.
This touches upon a traditional chivalric notion of women as in need of protection, implying that they have lesser strength and social status. We only see one woman in David's camp, but we can take her as representing the status of other women in the settlement as a storytelling device. You reveal a part to suggest the whole. This conversation is easy to overlook.
Infected. What? The girl. She's infected and she got out.
This is bad, David.
I need you to round up everyone who isn't armed and get them clear out of here.
Oh my god. I'll take the kids to the shelter.
Oh, fuck.
This again assigns women a lesser social role that corresponds with David's role as patriarch. We've mentioned the right to bear arms frequently through this video, so let's get into the meaning of that idea. Guns and other weapons are status symbols. We saw this in effect all the way back in Boston's quarantine zone.
That would never go down here. Any straggler even looks at me the wrong way, I put his ass down.
There we saw clearly a tiered social structure, and the social group on top, the military, had the right to bear arms. We noticed that they brandish assault rifles publicly, whereas Joel and Tess must sneak into a hidden passage to acquire comparatively weak weapons with limited ammunition.
Our backpacks are still here from last time.
Not a lot of ammo.
Make your shots count.
The right to bear arms communicates social status beyond the practical function of the firearm. Everything from our observations of Boston to the division of people into categories of armed and unarmed in David's camp reinforces this meaning.
I need you to round up everyone who isn't armed and get them clear out of here.
So, in David's camp, only men are armed, implicitly giving them greater power and social standing. They don't merely refuse to share their right to bear arms. The women appear to comply with their own subordination as weaker individuals to be protected. It seems they have internalized and then performed the assumed roles prepared for them by a patriarchal social structure. Women's roles in this context make no sense without a look at the patriarchy that they're subordinate to. So let's take a look at David as a spiritual and political patriarch. David's sequence revises the terms of patriarchy seen in Pittsburgh. In Pittsburgh, women were viewed as things to take control of by force.
Damn. Well, maybe you should have kept her. You know, made her one of us.
This implies that they are conquests of men performing patriarchal roles. Those women are outside the patriarchal, fraternal social structure, and the patriarchy more or less happens to them. In David's camp, when women collaborate with their social subordination, they are not outside the patriarchy. By their compliance, they also are the patriarchy by fulfilling roles that give legitimacy to patriarchal power. If this seems as creepy as the town's required cultic communion of human flesh, you're onto something. In each instance, a person must perform a role, however insincere or immoral, in order to become part of the clan and, therefore, receive protection from a dangerous outside world. Understanding this power relationship is crucial to understanding David's relationship to Ellie, since, after all, this trade-off of social status for protection is exactly what he offers her.
I can't protect you.
With the expectations of a pederast relationship. Using the tools of typological criticism, Ellie can be understood as the wild woman type that the hunters feared. This is an important exchange that deserves more attention than I think it receives. When David lists the qualities that constitute her wildness, he's putting a positive spin on the very character traits that have riled up the community.
You have heart. You're loyal. And you're special.
Oh.
And at the end, he dismisses them as sources for her power when he blankets them by sexualizing her. David's response after Ellie breaks his finger is revealing. He doesn't take back any of the idealized terms of praise, but he can no longer view them as positive because Ellie refused a compliant, sexualized role in his community.
What am I supposed to tell the others now?
Sexualizing Ellie is an offer to erase her, an offer to subordinate key qualities of her personality to one role.
Ellie is the little girl that broke your fucking finger!
Her resistance to erasure, which literally flows into the streets and ruined buildings of David's town, can be taken as evidence that her wildness would shake the community's foundation. This is how I read the following words during David's boss fight.
Gotta admit, had me back there. For a second, you shook my faith. But only for a second.
Earlier, we defined David's faith as an aggrandizement of his self-confidence. Viewing his relationship to Ellie as one of patriarch versus the wild woman, we can understand that his self-confidence is also an aggrandizement of his belief in the social order that puts him on top as patriarch. Ellie doesn't need David to survive, and her rejection of his offer for protection, in addition to her demonstrating that she can survive even the organized male violence of his patriarchal community, challenges one of David's ideals, that there is no viable social order other than his, no viable social organization other than a patriarchal order. Furthermore, in David's and Ellie's interactions, we see masculine denial of women's right to bear arms take shape literally. These literal instances are framed within the structure of image preparation and revision that we've used to understand the game's self-articulation. We receive image preparation when David puts Ellie in a sleeper hold as she exits the resort lodge.
Relax! Keeping you alive here. There you go. There you go.
He disarms her and imprisons her, taking away her volition and reducing her power for self-determination. We see this image revised and escalated when David intercepts Ellie's escape from the restaurant.
How did you do it?
Again, they meet in a doorway as Ellie attempts to escape, but key elements are reversed or escalated. The weapon is deadlier as David takes away Ellie's revolver rather than her switchblade. The stakes are higher, as David now wants to kill Ellie rather than capture and assimilate her into his community. And once more, we encounter the threat of rape as an element of a human ecology. This time we see that threat come from the patriarch himself. David observes Ellie's apparently inexhaustible, wild energy.
You know, it's okay to give up. Ain't no shame in it. I guess not. Just not your style, is it?
And then alludes, I think, to his capacity for sexual violence.
You think you know me? Huh? Well, let me tell you something. You have no idea what I'm capable of.
In the revised scenario at the restaurant, David's sexuality is violent rather than persuasive. I think this is also his final effort to overcome the wrench that Ellie has thrown into his worldview, as rape is usually based on the desire to control a person rather than based on sexual arousal alone.
Everything happens for a reason, right?
And, as a final escalation, Ellie does more than break David's finger.
Stop! Stop!
Fucking touch me!
It's okay. It's me. It's me. It's me. Look.
It is a vindication of a woman's right to bear arms as she turns the patriarch's very own weapon against him. She reinforces her own right to the status symbol, and she strips the patriarch of his. Finally, we have the Fireflies. Here we see a return to and revision of women's roles in Boston. We don't encounter any women in combat, something that I think is a weakness in the game's presentation of shared gender spaces reinforced elsewhere for the Fireflies. Yet, Firefly records found in the university imply that women participate in the military side of their organization. In this note, for example, we see sniper nest responsibilities relegated to a woman named Andrea. While the gender of the note's author remains unclear, if the author is, in fact, a woman, then we see a woman's personal sexual selection at work, a phenomenon that's denied under a patriarchal order. Assuming the author is a woman, the Lookout Sniper's self-expression indicates that she has the power to exercise her voice in spaces that, in patriarchal structures, are withheld from women by men as a means of control, such as we've seen in Pittsburgh and in David's camp. As well, on the military side, if we study the memorial wall in the university, we'll see both men and women honored for sacrificing their lives for the Fireflies' cause. Marlene, of course, establishes that women can hold positions of political power within the Fireflies.
Look, let's go find a Firefly.
We won't have to look very far.
There you go. Queen Firefly.
Her presence also reverses key elements of the patriarchal structures we saw in Pittsburgh and David's camp. Marlene's revision of David's role as a dominant, charismatic political leader may also be taken as a revision of the assumed patriarchal structure on which David's community was based. Patriarchal social structures tend to distribute power vertically, up toward a single figurehead. Because the Fireflies invest in their cause rather than in their leader, they are less centralized and can reconfigure power in their political structure as needed. This is difficult to do in a patriarchal setting without reverting to a survival of the fittest mentality, such as we saw in Pittsburgh.
You had an entire flock and you hit nothing.
I'm about to hit you.
Along with this, we see some revision of women's civilian roles available in Boston. Among the Fireflies, women also work in educated professions, specifically the medical profession, though only briefly as far as we see. At least he doesn't discriminate between genders. The surgeon who is prepping Ellie for surgery indicates an escalation of potential vocations from Boston's entrepreneurs, such as Tess and the woman running a shop in Boston's slums. This gives her some kinship with the woman betting on the fight in Boston as well, since both occupy traditionally male spaces. Unfortunately, assertions of women's social power and right to bear arms in both Boston and the Fireflies are undermined by the fact that women are most often heard of but not seen. The player has opportunities to kill female quarantine zone soldiers who have turned into runners, but the player cannot kill female soldiers who are uninfected in either Boston or the Firefly Hospital. This design element is at odds with the greater levels of gender equality depicted within Boston and the Fireflies. We can't know for sure why this disparity in the game's design exists, and it does appear at odds with the structural patterns that we've discussed. Ironically, its absence calls greater attention to the pattern that it leaves incomplete. Substantial evidence, such as what we've reviewed, exists to chart the structural development of the game's theme of women's opportunities in these human ecologies. Boston has a vertical power structure that includes women. These women benefit from the structure by participating in it and reinforcing it. Likewise, David's camp has a vertical power structure that includes women who receive benefits in the form of herd protection by participating in that social order, thereby upholding the system of their oppression. The Fireflies revise the vertical distribution of power, and as a result, we see women in positions of greater prestige, filling the roles of brain surgeons and political leaders alike. To close out, the development of women's social roles from the beginning to the end of The Last of Us corresponds with the development of other themes. Two of the groups that The Last of Us presents as fundamentally flawed, the quarantine zone militaries and the Fireflies, are best able to maintain women's social and professional gains in America just prior to the cordyceps pandemic. Billstown serves as a transition between one society that has retained some gender equality and another society that has retained none. Billstown is a space where women are not welcome, though this is not exclusive to them as women, given Bill's general paranoia. Yet it's a space where women are not actively erased, given Bill's respect for Tess as a business partner. The human ecologies that fall off of that continuum, specifically Pittsburgh and David's camp, lapse immediately back into different forms of abusive patriarchy. Pittsburgh is actively abusive and regards women as things to capture and keep. David's camp negates women's power by incorporating them as participants into the patriarchal social structures. It falls back upon brokering unspoken, implied deals with women who exchange their freedom for herd protection. Here, we find an unstated moral ambiguity regarding human ecologies, mostly with respect to Boston and the Fireflies. In those ecologies, The Last of Us expresses the community's flaws by attaching a quality that we approve of, women's ability to participate in a society's military, professional, or entrepreneurial classes, and places that quality in authoritarian organizations whose corruptions are either systemic, such as in Boston, or local, with respect to the Firefly surgeon's indifference on Ellie's input as to whether she lives or dies.
I won't let you take her. This is our future. Think of all the lives we'll save.
The alternatives offer either inhumane treatment in Pittsburgh, or herd protection in David's camp at a price higher than what is just or moral, whether we're considering cannibalism or women's participation in their own subjugation.
I can protect you.
Oh, thanks.
And our understanding of these conflicts become clearest when we correlate each human ecology to the others through structure. As noted before, the sewer community and Maria's camp stand out as deserving special attention. We'll address women's roles in their human ecologies at a later time. So, we'll continue our review of human ecologies in The Last of Us in the next video by considering different levels of technological sophistication between the game's communities. Thank you for watching.